Hello, I am Brock Stanton. I'm an aspiring meteorologist, and today we are going to be taking a look at this slight risk that ranges from portions of eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey all the way south through basically the coastal regions and eastern regions of South Carolina. The main hazards with this will be damaging winds, though just maybe a few instances of large hail and perhaps a few tornadoes will be possible. The greatest risk for tornadoes are going to be in this brown area. More or less, this is where there's more favorable shear, but for the most part, there's also going to be more sufficient destabilization of the atmosphere. As you go further north, the amount of instability becomes more in question, and there's not going to be a large amount of instability with this. So it's going to be a sufficient amount of instability in most of these areas, but the buoyancy is not going to be, or instability in the atmosphere is not going to be very robust. But the shear will be a little more favorable. So that's why we have our slight risk. We're going to take a look at our HRRR, and we're going to switch over to the 18Z, and we're going to see what it shows. And we're going to see how there's these showers in some areas in the morning, and there's a little bit of showers here. Some models are more aggressive with it, and depending on how that plays out, that would affect the amount of instability in the atmosphere for the later round of storms. But what we are going to see is that these lines of storms and clusters does develop into the late morning and early and afternoon hours, and again, mostly damaging winds, but especially in this area here where the HRRR tries to fire a supercell or two, there could be a little more of a tornado risk. Still mainly damaging winds, but a greater chance of a tornado or two would be possible in this region. And again, that sounding's not really good. There's too much contamination. Let's see if we can find a better sounding. Let's see if this works. This sounding's much less contaminated. You can see there's still not the most favorable turning in the photograph, but there is a stronger 850 jet, and that will still lead to, despite not really too much curving in the photograph, still the chance for a brief tornado or two. So you can see this first round of clusters does evolve, and then there is some chance that after that initial round of storms, a second round will push through for the areas further north into portions of Pennsylvania and perhaps surrounding areas like West Virginia, Maryland, and maybe northern Virginia. I'm not as confident that mode will evolve, but if it does, you could perhaps see an isolated damaging wind gust. That is also a possibility. I mentioned how our cape is not too robust for this system, and we're going to be taking a look at that now. And so you can see this is 7 a.m. on Friday. So as we get into the early afternoon, we can see here for the mode in Pennsylvania, there's generally about 500 to 750 mixed layer cape, and you generally look to have values greater than 1,000 for severe weather. Now there is some stronger shear in the atmosphere in the lower levels, nothing too crazy, but there is more of it, and especially as that instability increases further into the afternoon, that will be enough to support severe weather, but it's not going to be a widespread risk. Could be somewhat more isolated in nature and rely on those areas of greater instability to develop, and wherever those does, there would be an increased chance of damaging winds. So this run of the HRRR says probably southeastern PA into New Jersey, and generally points south of there. And then we can see here how after that first round of showers and storms, that some instability does try and develop behind it, and again, there could be an isolated instance of a severe wind gust or two if that line evolves, but I'm not confident it will. That's a much more conditional risk for severe weather. Next we're going to take a look at our lapse rates, and this is the rate at which temperatures are cooling in the mid-levels of our atmosphere, and we're going to see that our mid-level lapse rates are honestly going to be pretty not too favorable whatsoever for severe weather. This is by 18Z, and we can see how our mid-level lapse rates are generally around 5.5 on the HRRR degrees Celsius per kilometer, and you generally look for greater than 6 for severe weather, and we're just really not going to see that. So this is going to limit our instability, but it's also going to limit our hail risk. And because of these poor lapse rates, that's why I think we really probably only see a couple instances of severe caliber hail throughout most of the slight risk area. There could be a lot more instances of smaller hail, less than quarter size, less than an inch in diameter, because you don't really need as favorable lapse rates for that. But to really get those quarter size or greater hail, that's going to probably be few and far between tomorrow because of these weak lapse rates. But we're now going to be taking a look at our shear, and the first parameter we are going to look at for our shear is our 850 jet. And we're going to see here as we get into the early afternoon hours, we can see how there's this broad quarter. This is, I believe, 16Z. That should be noon. And we're going to see there's this pretty broad quarter of 30 to 35 knot 850 winds. And that could support, assuming enough instability does develop, that we could see a brief weak tornado either within a line, or if within the line, or maybe there's a little more discrete mode and we can see a tornado in that. Though again, even if we do see a more isolated storm, still the primary risk is going to be damaging winds. So again, yeah, there could be a brief tornado, but it's mostly going to be a risk of damaging winds. 50, 60, 65 miles per hour is generally what we're going to be looking at. We're now going to be taking a look at our bulk shear. And again, we're going to see into the early afternoon. Here, this is which was our first round of storms, and it's going to be greater further north. Generally 35 to 45 knots of bulk shear, and that's going to be sufficient for perhaps an embedded supercell within the line and general organization of storms into clusters. But it's going to be less further south into North Carolina and South Carolina, and generally be like 25 to 35 knots, which you can still get severe weather with. It just doesn't promote as much organization. But we can see here how if that evening round of storms does develop, that there's going to be more favorable deep layer shear. And there won't be as much low-level shear in the atmosphere for this quarter, say maybe from portions of West Virginia, Northern Virginia, parts of Maryland, and South Central and Central Pennsylvania, that there's not going to be as much low-level shear, but there could be some, and that would basically eliminate any sort of tornado risk with that second round. But there's more deep layer shear, so that could see if enough instability develops. And again, that's a really big if with this second round, but if it does, perhaps some more organized clusters of storms could evolve. That's probably going to be the type of scenario where we're going to figure out after the first round of storms come through, if maybe the sun comes out, if the temperature's warm, if there's going to be enough fuel to have that happen. So that's probably something we're not going to be able to be too confident in until the day of the event, which will be tomorrow, and we'll probably figure out if that's going to happen in like the afternoon hours, just to see. It's going to be a pretty difficult thing to try and figure out, but regardless, I think either way it would be an isolated risk. We're now going to take a look at our storm relative helicity values. And again, we're going to see how generally our greater values are going to be further into portions of Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania and Virginia and surrounding areas like that into New Jersey and Delaware. This is our 0 to 1 storm relative helicity levels, and this is important for seeing that tornado potential. But they are still there further south, so even outside of that 5% zone for tornadoes, you still have that 2%, and there could still be a brief weak tornado in there, but generally the odds are going to be lower. Yeah, so that's the storm relative helicity, and I believe that's it for our HRRR. We are going to take a look at our NAM now. Yeah, we're going to take a look at the NAM. And let's see. This is not going to, 18Z is not going to go quite far enough to show the whole event, so we're going to have to stick to 12Z, unfortunately. Here's what the 12Z does. We can see how there's more coverage in those morning showers, and that would likely limit the severe risk for areas further north into portions of Pennsylvania. But that it still does develop this line of showers and storms, though it's really hit or miss because of that weaker instability, and this run of the NAM kind of just completely fizzles it out into eastern Pennsylvania because of those rounds of morning showers and storms, and that's really just gonna make it there'd just be not enough instability for storms, not enough cooling of the temperatures aloft. And then, but we do see that it still tries to develop this evening round. You can see into portions of Virginia, perhaps portions of trying to get up into portions of PA. But generally, I would, once you get after sunset, that already limited instability will weaken even further, and as such, any severe risk would really end shortly after sunset. Again, these could still be storms at this point, but there really wouldn't be a severe risk. Could maybe just see some lightning into the overnight hours. We're going to take a look at our instability now. We're kind of going to see how that morning round likely is going to limit the instability, and you can see here it does, how the NAM 3K really has about 250 to 500 amounts of mixed air cape, joules of mixed air cape, and further south it has that greater amount where there's less showers. I'm not quite sure if we're going to get values like around 2,000 or something, but we could see values up to 1,500, which would certainly support a little, would certainly support that damaging wind risk. But really further north, the instability just doesn't develop for that initial round. And again, it tries to come in for that evening round. Again, I'm not too confident in that. We're just going to have to watch and see if that does occur. So just realize while the chances might be fairly low, that just because that first line of showers and storms pushes through, that you may not be completely done with the severe weather. Again, the risk would be fairly low end, but it could still be there. So now we're going to be taking a look at our lapse rates on the NAM 3K in the mid-levels of our atmosphere. And we're going to see how for areas a little farther east, they are going to be a tiny bit more favorable. And that is what leads to a little more instability on the NAM 3K compared to the HRRR. But overall, they're still really only marginally supportive of severe weather. And again, these areas kind of develop a little bit for that instability for that evening round. I'm not really banking on that evening round for severe weather. It's going to be very conditional upon how the atmosphere evolves after that first round of storms, and sometimes models kind of underdo the effect of convection on the atmosphere sometimes, and I just kind of wonder if that's happening in this case. But we'll just have to watch and see how the models develop into tonight and tomorrow, and of course how the actual atmosphere does develop. But we can see how there's going to be sufficient shear here, more than sufficient shear on the NAM. There's values of about 40 to 50 knots, which is slightly more than what the HRRR showed, but both show very favorable shear access for the northern mode, say from parts of Virginia into eastern PA, New Jersey. But further south, it's still generally less, though it's still generally, I would say, just maybe a tiny bit more than the HRRR. So the NAM has more shear overall, and more instability further south, but less instability further north. So what I would overall see is that if the NAM solution is correct, further south into maybe parts of Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina would probably have the greatest risk for severe weather. I'm not 100% sure that's what's going to evolve, but that's what the NAM is telling me. We're going to take a look at our 850 jet as well. That was our bulk shear. Here's our 850 jet. And we're going to see how, again, the NAM has a more powerful 850 jet. I'm not sure how much I believe this, but it does have a very, a much more favorable 850 jet. There's this quarter of 40 to 50 knots, and I just think that's probably overdoing it, especially when it just kind of expands a little bit. I think this is overdoing it on the NAM 3K's part. I really do. I just don't think the low-level wind field is going to be this strong for this system. If this did happen, it could lead to a slightly greater tornado risk, but still, damaging winds would be the primary risk, and I just think the NAM 3K is overdoing the low-level shear for this system. One more thing we're going to take a look at is our moisture. We'll take a look at it on the HRRR as well. But we're generally going to see how further south we could have dew points into the upper 60s or 70s, and further north probably into the mid 60s, maybe even upper 60s. But again, further north, because of that morning rounds of showers and storms, there's just not enough instability on the NAM 3K. And something I should say is that there is a lot of cloud cover for this event. Here, let's take a look at that quickly. And that is one of the other things that is going to limit more robust instability from developing here. See, look, this is early morning hours, getting into the early afternoon, and you can see there's a little more cloud break further south, but especially for that northern mode, there's just not going to be enough. Again, maybe an isolated instance of the sun breaking through, but generally there's just not going to be enough daytime heating to support as much of a severe risk as what could have been realized if there was less cloud cover, but it's just not going to be the case with this system. So we can see, looking at the cloud cover on the HRRR, how on the northern areas through a large portion of Pennsylvania that the cloud cover looks very similar to what it does on the NAM. Further south, though, it has more cloud cover than what the NAM shows, and that's, again, why the instability is less on the HRRR further south, but because of the lack of morning storms, that's why it's a little bit greater further north, and that's probably why that slight risk is in effect for areas further north. And again, we're just going to take one more look at the moisture on the HRRR, because I said I was going to show that, and I almost forgot. We can see here how, again, upper 60s to 70s dew points further south and around about mid-60s dew points further north. The rich level of moisture with this system is going to lead to at least some destabilization of the atmosphere despite the cloud cover and despite the poor rate of temperatures cooling off. And combine that with the stronger shear with this system, we could see some damaging winds and perhaps a tornado or two. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing, following me on Twitter. My Twitter should be linked in the description. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Bye.